Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we continue to talk about the Stanley Cup Finals that wrapped up last night. And it had a lot of people up in arms about the debate surrounding the Conn Smythe Trophy winner, which was given to Connor McDavid, despite the fact that the Oilers ended up losing the series. So I want to dive into that next here. McDavid becomes one of 6 players in the history of the NHL to win this award while also being on a losing team in the playoffs. Only the second forward to ever do so, the last one being Reggie Leach in 1976. So again, this is a pretty unheard of feat here, especially in the modern era of the NHL. And it was definitely weird. Again, this was a situation where really after Game 5, it seemed like we were headed in this direction, that Connor McDavid had secured the Conn Smythe Trophy, and that pretty much came into fruition here, where he went scoreless in each of the last 2 games, and it still didn't matter, and he was given the trophy. But again, it did feel very weird, where especially so because it was in Florida, you had the boos coming out there, and it is absolutely worth having the debate as to whether or not it was justified. I think that ultimately, like I mentioned, McDavid with his multiple, I think it was 4-point outings in back-to-back games in games 4 and 5 that really secured it for him, and making history there, along with the number of other individual statistics he put up over the course of this postseason, breaking Wayne Gretzky's record for the most assists ever in a single postseason. Anytime you're breaking a Gretzky record, you are doing something right, and that was absolutely the case with McDavid. The 4th most points all time in a single postseason, so absolutely one for the record books. Now, the reason why I think that it becomes more of an argument is the fact that he did go scoreless in games 6 and 7. And ultimately, when you look at the record books and the history of award winners, the idea is that it provides sort of a story as to what took place, especially, when you look at the Conn Smythe, the entirety of the postseason. McDavid had a historic run. So absolutely he should be recognized for it. But ultimately, there should be a little bit of an extra added weight to these Stanley Cup Finals games. And if McDavid had even, scored a goal or had an assist or two in the final 2 games, I don't think that there would be much of an argument whatsoever. But it's the fact that, again, he was just so worn out by the end of the series that it is really interesting to see, especially on the other end where you have Bobrovsky, who absolutely struggled during those games that the Panthers ended up losing. We've talked, a number of times about the stat of 12 of the first 13 games of the postseason, he allowed 2 goals or less, and then he went on to allow 3+ in 3 straight games. Was really bad timing for him in terms of this award. Now, ultimately, we're talking about an award here, or a trophy in this case, and I would have to imagine, us as fans and in the media, we care more about this than the actual players do. Connor McDavid, he didn't even come out to accept the Conn Smythe Trophy. Some people had an issue with that. He hung back with his teammates, and I think that that's just what a leader would do. It's not He didn't want to have this big moment for himself individually while suffering this brutal loss. So, again, I think people just like to complain more than anything. But, again, when you come back to the conversation of really, I do think it was between Sergei Bobrovsky and between Connor McDavid. Now, Alexander Barkov probably had a conversation for a lot of this series, especially or a lot of this postseason, you could say even, especially once Bobrovsky was running into some trouble during that stretch of losing these games. But ultimately, it was really just down between these two in my eyes. And again, my ultimate, feeling on it in general is that nobody really took it from McDavid once he did win, or he did have those multiple big games in 4 and 5 that, from there, Bobrovsky had a nice closeout performance, absolutely, but he wasn't exactly lights out in Game 6 either, allowing 3 goals in that game. And again, I just think that it became McDavid's trophy to lose once Game 5 wrapped up, and nobody from the Panthers necessarily did that. And again, I understand it was the first time I've ever seen that of an MVP type trophy awarded to somebody losing the finals. Now, obviously, we all know that this is for the entirety of the postseason. We don't have to dive into that all that much deeper, but in general here, just seeing the fact that the Panthers are all celebrating on the ice and they come out and announce that it's somebody from the losing team that is awarded this prestigious trophy, it's weird, but at the same time, I don't think you can get all too upset about it, considering the fact that McDavid had all of these moments throughout the postseason where it was just so clear that he is the best player in hockey. And not just that, from an individual standpoint, but he led the Oilers all the way, not just to the finals, but to a Game 7, and almost did overcome, historic odds. And obviously, there's an argument that people have thrown out there in terms of, all right, but for what? Like, what did it result in? Well, it resulted in making Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals basically as close as you can get to winning, but not winning. And I understand that it is all about the cup at the end of the day, but at the same time, you can't diminish everything that McDavid did just because at the end of it they end up losing in this heartbreaking way. I just feel like I understand it's a little bit of a weird, gross feeling almost to be, sitting there watching somebody from a losing team be awarded. Again, something that I hadn't experienced before, but at the same time, I think it was totally justified. I don't have any problem with it. If Bobrovsky had been better down the stretch of this series, it would have been his award. And obviously last night it was 23 saves on 24 shots. He was great, but coming off of that stretch of really bad games, both he and McDavid had those, you could say, in parts of this series. Nobody was flawless, but if you look at the overall collection of work from both of these players, McDavid had a run for the ages in this postseason, and I think we're going to be looking at a very long stretch before anybody tops his record of, I think he finished with 42 assists, and it might have been more than that actually. He might have gotten up to 45 or so, but I don't want to speculate off the top of my head here with numbers, but there's just no denying Connor McDavid's excellence, and it wasn't his year to win, unfortunately. I think that it is definitely disappointing to see the fact that he was scoreless the last 2 games. The fact that Leon Draisaitl just never really showed up for the Oilers in this series was a huge hurt to them, considering the fact that, he showed some flashes maybe in the first period of Game 6 that he was going to be able to find his footing in this series, and he just never did. So, ultimately, I think that this postseason in general for the NHL was just phenomenal. It's definitely the playoffs that I've paid the most attention to in my viewing of hockey, and it was just, especially off of, an NBA playoffs that was maybe a little bit underwhelming. The NHL did us justice with this one, and we got an all-time series in this. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section about the series in general, whether or not you think McDavid should have won the Conn Smythe. But we're going to be shifting gears a little bit here to the NBA, where we are just one day away from the NBA draft, at least the first round, as they are breaking it up into 2 days. But with that being said, I want to dive into my list of my top 10 favorite prospects in this upcoming draft. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.